Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Low Code Cafe, number 109. Today, we're going to talk about workflows and do a deep dive on workflows. This is an event we hold every Wednesday for our take two, by the way. Hold every Wednesday for our community, and so it's a technical event. We record all these, and they're out on our YouTube channel, and youtube.com/plantanap. Today, we're going to be talking about some things from the trenches, from the trenches of support, and we'll also do the hands-on low-code development dealing with workflows. And without further ado, we'll get right into from the trenches. We have two versions to talk about today. One is version 1.21, our past version, because we're about to release version 1.22. We are not releasing any hotfixes to version 1.21, and that version now will probably not get any more hotfixes. Version 1.22, if it's not out today, will come out imminently. And as soon as you install it, there are a couple of hotfixes that we recommend, and we'll talk about them in a second. In version 1.22, there is a known conflict for those of you who use too sexy content, on especially version 13 and above of too sexy content. And really that conflict existed starting in version 1.20 and 1.21 as well. So if you are using too sexy content, we advise you to communicate with support, and we can walk you through the process of how to upgrade that. There's a conflict between the way that some DLLs are targeted. So this is something that happens in the web config. And just if you don't communicate with us, you may find issues where your site will break as you install these upgrades. So just work with us. We'll help you through that. For version 1.22, after you install use the one-click installer to install version 1.22, you'll see that there are some hotfixes. Two of these are in the area of automation, and so after you reorder, for example, this first one, after you move things around in the new automation interface, we find that the rich text was no longer editable, so this fix solves that. And if you were to clone an automation, there would be some loss of it's not a true clone. Some actions wouldn't have parameters, so that's a fix. And then we also made a change in search to remove report history data. And when you have our product installed for a very long time, the history data begins to accumulate, and if you're not doing anything with it, it's really just a waste of space. So we have a feature that will automatically remove this back to 90 days, typical use case. But you'll have control over how long it remains. We do another event every week, the Low Code Campfire. It happens this same hour on Fridays, and I encourage you to come and participate in that. That's more of a conversation instead of a presentation webinar that we do here. And so you'll have the opportunity to meet your fellow PlantanApp users, as well as to help them with issues that they may face and get some help that you may need. I will put some links for this episode on. Let me do that here. Put those on the chat. So you can register in advance for Low Code Campfire. You can get to our recordings, to the community portal, and to give us feedback on this webinar. The community portal also has, at the top of that, you'll have the ability to go to live help. We run at least 3 sessions a week. We've added another session that's more in keeping with our European partners' hours. So anyway, take a look at that. Look for live help on the community.planetapp.com, and it will tell you the hours that we're available to drop by and get some help. Actually, I say drop by, but you'll really want to sign up for in advance. If we have no signups, we close the session without providing help. So do sign up in advance. So we'll go now to hands-on low coding and do a deep dive. We have we're going to talk about workflows, and so just quickly a definition: workflows are core segments of logic that you can call from elsewhere in your application. So they have inputs, they have a defined process or set of actions that take place, and then they can provide output. And those are similar to what you might do in a subroutine or a method if you're familiar with other development languages. So that's what you'll get out of a workflow. And today we'll just cover everything workflow. So we'll talk about the administrative interface, how to create one and clone one and things like delete one, all those things. But then we'll also go over all of the components. We'll talk about the administrative form, the canvas where you do the work to set up actions, and the various tools that are available. And then we'll move into testing and using workflows. There's a couple of known limitations, so we'll touch on those, and some advanced concepts that we'll get into as well. So diving in, the first is the administrative interface, and I'm going to flip back and forth between this presentation and a live version. So we have the workflows, and so up at the top we have things. We have a header bar, where you can import a workflow, create a new workflow. There's some help hidden here under this question mark. So that's the way that you would create a new workflow, or if you wanted to import a workflow from another system. You can filter if you use our namespaces concept. If you provide a namespace for the items, you can filter by namespace. So for right now, for example, we have default items shown, and then if you have the name of you can type the name of a workflow that you're looking for, and it'll filter the list. So a quick search for items in the list. So those are the header type things where you can filter and search. But then we have tools. Every workflow, you have the ability to test, to edit, duplicate, export, and delete. So those appear to the right when you hover. And so if you wanted to run a workflow, you could click this and it would bring up the input screen. You could run it. So for example, we just would click run to make that one go. We're going to cover edit quite a bit today, so I'm going to skip that for a second. If you click duplicate, it'll create a new copy of the workflow and let you edit it. So we have create customer copy. It's already opened up for editing. You can just change its name and you'll have a duplicate of it. So if you were to if you have a workflow and you want to do something very similar, you can use that as a starting spot. You can use this tool to export a workflow if you want to bring it to another system, or just to keep a copy of it. You can save it as a file, or you can copy the content. And when you do that, this is when you would use the import workflow, for example, on another system, and paste that same content there. You would be able to import the workflow into that system. So that's the export and import functionality. And then finally, delete. If you don't need something, you can click delete. It'll give you a confirmation dialog. Do you really want to delete this workflow? And once you delete it, it is permanently gone from your system. So those are the workflow tools. So let's talk about the components of a workflow. Each workflow has a namespace and a name, and then 3 sections, and what you're giving it as input, if anything, the actions that you take, and then what output comes out of it. So let's take a look at all those. We'll create a new workflow. We get this namespace dialog, and so you can pick a namespace from the list. I'm going to create a new one. It's going to be called Café. You can name it anything you want, but the idea is that you want to group things that are related to the same topic together. That way you can search for them together. So will now, by creating this namespace Café and selecting it, it will show up here in the name as it's the Café namespace. And from now on, we'll be able to access just all the things that relate to Café. This namespace, excuse me, this workflow is going to be named demo. You'll want to name it something useful, perhaps provide a description. So now it has a name and it has that description, and we'll take a look at it in a minute in the administrative interface to see how that shows up. As mentioned, we have inputs, processing that takes place, all the actions that you want to take place, and outputs. And so we'll be defining each of these. But first of all, one of the things I want to mention, one of the very minimum that you need is that in the process section, you must have a start, which is provided for you automatically, but you must also have an end. And so I'm going to hit the add end event. This now we will be defining a workflow that doesn't do anything. It has no inputs, no outputs, and it just goes straight from start to end. But it will allow us to save. So now I can cover these buttons up here at the top. We have the ability to just simply save the workflow. And when you do that, it saves it and leaves you editing the workflow. So this is a feature we've added recently, just so you can save along the way. As you get to a good spot, you can save. There's also the ability to save and test, which means that it saves it and then runs it at the same time. I'm going to go back, and I'll save my changes as I go back, just to show that this now shows up as Café in the Café namespace called demo. And here's the description that I provided. You can also see the date and time it was created and who did it. And now this filtering includes Café. And so if I only want to pay attention to the things created in Café, I can select that. So that kind of closes the loop on that administrative interface and touches on the main things, the ability to set a name and the main sections. So moving on from that, let's take a look at the administrative form. The things that you can do while you're editing, and then this thing that we call the BPM and Canvas, or the process section. It's using an external tool, an external library called BPMN. Let's edit our workflow and take a look at that. Well, let's cover a tool first. I'm going to make some space. There's this create and remove space tool, and since I put an end on here, I want to use it to make some space. So clicking on the tool and then clicking in an area lets us move things around a little bit, and so that's useful. Up on the top here, we have some things that we can do. We can add an action, we can import actions, we can export actions. So the first thing that we're going to do is add an action that is, I'm going to stick with very simple actions today, but you can add any kind of an action. Most actions are available to you. I'm going to create and update a token. And so this is going to be create our result token. We'll add it here. It's going to be called result, and it's going to be Y. So this is going to create a token or a variable that we can use elsewhere in our process, or just return it as output. But having done this, if we save and test, it's not going to do anything. We've created it and we haven't outputted anywhere. And so it does run, but it doesn't do anything. So let's add on to that a little bit. And we'll do some output. If we output our, create an output parameter, and it's going to be called, in this case, let's call it out result. It doesn't matter what we call it. We name it something useful to us, and we'll see it when we'll see that name when we try and use this workflow. So we'll know what's going to be able to know what's going to be coming back to us. But we're going to provide the output of result. So putting result in brackets is going to return the value of that token. So if we now save and test it and we run it, we now see that out result has a high. So this is one way to get information out of our system, but we've also proved that the process works. It's a very simple process. It's just creating a token and then outputting it, but at least we proved that it worked. Try and let's see, I've already talked about save and test. Let's talk a little bit about the tools that are available. We have the ability to the global connect tool, hand, a lasso, and a create and remove space. So I already talked a little bit about create and remove space, just the ability to move everything around. If you want to use the lasso tool, it lets you select an area and everything within that area is now selected. And so, for example, selected items, you can now export them and they show up in an export, which you can either save as a file or copy. I'm going to touch on, since I did that, I'm going to touch on import. If I have something on my clipboard and I paste it, so I've exported and copied, now I can paste it. And so now I get another create and update token. So that's the recommended way to duplicate something. If you have something, an action or a set of actions that you want to duplicate, you can highlight it, export it, import it back in, and now it's added to your canvas. There's a couple of things that we can do here. I could pick this up just using this hand tool. I can pick it up and move it around. And typically you might want to drop it on the line here so that it would connect. And that's probably the most typical thing, so I'll do that. And notice now we have, it's automatically, because I've dropped it in the middle of it, it's created this arrow. So now this is connecting to this. So the process goes, we're going to start from start. It's going to create a result token. It's going to do this other thing, whatever we tell it to do, and then end. So let's move on a little bit to input. I'm jumping around a little bit, but I'm trying to demonstrate as I go. So let's say that we're going to our workflow. The purpose of it is to return a nice message. Hi, Joe. So I am going to create a new input parameter that's the name of whatever we want to create. And I'm also going to provide it a value, a default value. So if when we're testing, we don't have to type a value, it'll default to Joe. We can, that's good for testing. Oftentimes you might not need it. Might not need a default value when you're actually going to use something, but we're going to provide a default value. So there's now this input variable called name, and it has the value of Joe. In our processing, just a reminder, we created result and it has the value of high. If we go to our next step then, and now we're going to modify result. So we're going to use the value of result as it exists when we come into this step, but then we're going to add name, this new variable that we've created. And so this will have the value of high, this will have the value of Joe, and since we're outputting it here on our out result, we should see the combination of that. So we'll save and test. Notice that it says the default value is Joe. So if we just click run, it's going to use Joe, and so we get hi, Joe. So our workflow does some very little amount of work, but it does some work. If we run that again, save and test and put in Dale, we can prove that it overrides the default, and so we get Dale. Good. All right. So let's see. I was covering the tools, and so we'll talk about the tools a little bit more in this area. If something isn't connected, or if you, let's say we even delete this connection, and you want to connect it, you can use this global connect tool. So you click on the tool, you point to the thing that you want to connect, and you point to what you want to connect to, and it will do that. So that's the purpose of the global connect tool. The hand is kind of the default functionality and lets you move everything around, so you can scoot things around. And yeah, I think we've covered them all now. So I'm going to go on. There's a couple of other tools that I don't use so much, and it's the center view and the mini map. So these tools show up down here, and so sometimes, especially if you get a big workflow, perhaps it's off to the side or you've scrolled away from it, the center view will bring it back so that you can center the content into the view. And then the mini map, when you click on it, it shows you all of your content, but small, and you can actually drag the square around to get it to position where you want to. So that's useful if you, especially as you have a large workflow, the ability to find the section that you want. Good. So that center view and mini map. The mouse wheel does some good stuff. You can do up and down, left and right, zoom in and out. So you can't see me spinning my wheel here, but I will do it. If I just spin it without clicking anything, we have an up and down motion. If I hold shift, we get a left and right motion. And if I hold control, we can zoom in and zoom out. Zooming in is kind of nice when you're working on a small section and you want to focus in on that, be able to read it. Sometimes there's conditionals that show up in pretty small print. So zooming in and out is kind of useful. And let's see, if I use my center view thing, it defaults back to a normal size. Some of you are probably aware that your browser, you can zoom in and out on the browser, and that changes the size of everything and might not be what you want. So probably better that you use the control zoom in and out functionality to roll your mouse wheel. Great. Moving on. So we have action tools. Every time that you're focused on something, you have the ability to add, typically add an action, add an end, add settings, add an exclusive gateway or an if block, or comment, or remove an action. So these show up when you click an action. You see all these showing up to the right, and when you hover them, you can see what they do. But if we want to add an action, for example, at the end, I'm going to make a little bit of space. If you don't make space, the line does funny things. I guess I could show that too, but we'll save that for a minute. So this is probably the most typical use. You click add an action, you pick something else that you want it to do. Let's say we want to send an email. And so it drops it on the line and begins to configure it. And we can just save that for the moment. I'm not going to fill it out, but that's how you would add another action. And any of the other actions that are available, you can either find them by their section, or you can start typing and let it help you find them for you. But that's how you add an action. This is what happens when you don't have enough room, right? So it'll drop this new action and contort the line a little bit. And I'll just point out that you can, if it does that to you, you can straighten it out. It takes a couple of clicks, but not a big deal. Okay. So that's add an action. We did add an end earlier. That's it's already there, but if you don't have one, you can use that tool to add an end. The next one is action settings. And so if you wanted to configure the send email, you could click that and it's going to open up the settings for that action, all about how you're going to send this email. Note that if you double click, it does the same thing. So I find myself double clicking all the time, but if you want to use the wrench tool, you can do that. We'll cover this one, the exclusive gateway, again in a minute. But if you want to, let's do commenting and deleting. So a comment, if there's something specific that you want to say about this, this is an opportunity for you to document. Say whatever you want to say. You can expand the box as much as you want. I think we can reposition it if we, yeah. So this is a way to document what you're doing if you want to call attention. And sometimes, for example, there's an action that we have called execute actions. And a lot of times a lot of activity can be hidden within one thing. So I might do a comment like, this is the main processing of this. And the idea is, as with any documentation, it's A, to remind me tomorrow what I was thinking today, because I can't always remember, but B, it's to help out the person that's going to maintain your code. So that's a nice way to add a comment. There is a tool on this to delete the comment. So if we don't like that, we can get rid of it. But yeah, if we're not going to actually send an email, then there's a remove action tool, and that'll remove it. So those are the tools that are available to you. On the canvas itself, I already mentioned that the start and the end are required. The actions follow the line that you provide. So they start at the start and they follow the arrows. If we rearrange things here visually, it doesn't matter. It's still going to follow the arrows to get from point A to point B. So now we've come to using conditional branching or gateways. Before we do that, I'm just going to save and test this so we can verify that it's starting with a good working spot. And so when we run this, we get hi Joe. It's just the way that we were working with a minute ago. And so I am going to change this a little bit so that we get a different message depending on whether the name starts with a letter early in the alphabet or late in the alphabet. Not really a particularly great case, but just to demonstrate that conditional gateways work. And let's see where we are. Yep, okay. So the idea is that we've created this result token that says hi, and then we're adding the name afterwards in the second step. If we're going to provide a slightly different message if the name starts early in the alphabet or late. So we'll do a branch here after hi to do that. So we will add an exclusive gateway. It appears on the screen. And the thing that you're going to want to look for is that there is this automatically provided item, double click to set condition. So it will only go down this path to this part if the condition is true. So we can do something like if the name that came in on our inputs is, let's see, less than or equal to M, then it's going to go down that path. And so that's the condition. And again, it's a pretty fine print and another reason why you might use the zoom so if you need to read it. So that's our one. And this is connected to this line. If we move some things around, it might move a little bit. And sometimes if you move things pretty dramatically, you'll find that this might not be where you want it. So you can position it to best indicate that it only goes down that path if that condition is true, typically right on the path. So the next thing we're going to want to do is to add another create update token and provide our slightly different message. So the thing that we're going to do is create update token, and I'm going to so we'll be creating still the same results token. We're still going to be using the name. Not, again, particularly useful logic, but just to illustrate that we get a different result. And so now when since we added an action to the split, we get another double click to set condition. And so we'll do the opposite condition here. When you do a split, and you can do as many actions in there as you want, at the end, you need to merge things back together so that it comes back together on the same line. You might do more things after that, but certainly you need to merge back together again before you get to the end. So if you use the same tool, and now since we've got a gateway going on, you can either do another split, which is multi-nesting, but in our case, our simple case, we just want to add an end. And then we can use our global connect tool to connect from here to here. And so that brings it back together again. This path is for one thing, this path goes to the other thing, and it'll merge back together again. So with that, let's test so far. So we'll do a save and test, and we'll pick Amy and run, and it says, "Hi, Amy." And if we pick Robert, it says, "Robert, I see your name starts with a letter after M." So we get a different result. I didn't do, I forgot to do this. I really wanted it to still say "hi name." So we're still building an output from that earlier version. So we'll test again and say, "Robert. Robert, I see your name starts with letter after M." So a couple of things about these conditional branches. They can, any valid token type expression, any valid expression that you can use in a conditional elsewhere in the product, you can use here. So these can be quite complex and use double ampersands to mean and, or double pipes to mean or. So you can have quite a few conditions. You can add, so the conditions can get long, and maybe that might necessitate that you move them around and expand the box a little bit. But you can add more conditions, so that this could be a 3 or 4 or 5. One of the things to know is that there isn't an else logic. Your conditions that you define have to provide a path for whatever values you're testing. There has to be something that is a path for it to move forward, and we don't provide an else branch. So that's a limitation of the product, but knowing that, you can design accordingly. Yeah, so that's the exclusive gateway functionality. So we've already been testing these in workflows. You can use save and test, and you can get your, I'm going to resize here. I'm going to use my center view to get it all back on one screen. But within the product, you can use, within workflows, you can save and test. And just from a technique standpoint, providing good defaults makes it very easy for you to just click run and see what it does. You can override the defaults, but that accelerates the testing. So I would definitely use that. But now it comes to, okay, how can workflows be used within our product? Because typically you don't build them just to run them in the interface. Now you want to consume them elsewhere. So anywhere that we support using actions, you can find them under the workflow topic as execute plus whatever name you gave it. So execute demo. And so let's give that a try. On my site, I have a page that I've set up in advance called workflow test page, and I haven't put anything on here yet, so I'm going to build it from scratch. In this case, I'm going to start with a action form. So we add an action form to the page. It's empty, and so we're going to manage it and just pick that we want a blank form. So the idea here is that we're going to let somebody type in their name and click a button and get the message that comes back from it. So from an endpoint perspective, we need a text box for their first name. And then we're going to add a button that is, doesn't really matter what we call it, but I'm going to call it the get message button. And this is going to have the actions that call our workflow. And then in terms of fields, I'm going to have another field, another text field in this case. Could be any type, but I'm going to create a text field that is I'm going to call this result message. And so this is going to give us our basic layout. The logic that goes into the get message then is that we want to take the first name and pass it to the workflow. I am going to copy the first name ID so I can easily paste it. We go down here to our on-click handler and look in workflows, and we have execute demo. So again, the naming of your workflow is kind of important for you to help you to be able to find it. When you load a workflow action into something, it's going to show you what the input fields are defined for that. So it asks for name and it gives an out result. And so we want to pass it the value of first name, which I copied from above. And we also are going to put the message into result message. So I'm copying that to the clipboard and putting it here. I'll just touch on briefly, when do I use brackets, when do I don't use brackets, because that ends up being a point of confusion. We want to pass the value of first name into the item. So we put it in brackets. We want to store the result into a variable called, or a token called result message. So when you're storing it, you don't use the brackets. So this is when we want to take the value. This is where we want to store it. Little confusing. But then after we've executed demo, there's just one other thing we're going to want to do. There's an action called update form Ajax. And this just means that whatever actions have happened, in this case, our result message has been update, it's going to get pushed back onto the screen and the form isn't going to the page isn't going to fully refresh. This update form Ajax just makes it look like it stays on the same page without refreshing. So that's necessary in this case. So we'll save our little form program here and give it a test. If we click get message and don't provide a name, it's still going to use our default. So we get hi Joe. If we type Amy, we get hi Amy. So it's taking our input, giving us output. And if we type Robert, we're going to get that alternate path. So that's shows that our workflow is working and shows how to consume it. Yeah. So any of our various, this is kind of what we've been doing all along here, and I've used that in a workflow, use that workflow in a form. and a form button. But where can you use a workflow? Well, they can be used almost anywhere that there's actions that workflow is going to show up. So we did it in a form, but you can also do it in a listing. You can do it in an API endpoint. You can do it in an automation, anywhere where actions are available. And then there's a special type, tokens, and we'll get into that in just a second. So let's add a listing and show that we can use it in a listing as well. So we add an action grid, which is our internal name for a listing, and we'll drop it right here. And I am going to do work on the settings and configure this to show us a list of customers. It's just an entity that we've already created in a past episode. I'm not going to configure that in any other way beyond that. We're getting customers. So I'm going to call this the customer listing. I always advise that you name these things. And so we're going to add some fields, and we're going to add the ID and also the name of the customer. There's a lot of other fields in that one, but we have customer names and their related IDs. Remember, in our entities, everything, one of the default fields is the ID, the unique ID that gets assigned to it. So we've added that, and we'll save. So when we look at this now, we have a listing that has names and IDs, and now we can go on to prove that we can consume that workflow from here. For example, we can add a button on every row that says that computes that message. Again, not a very useful piece of work that workflow is doing, but we can prove that it does work. So let's take a look at that. We go into the listing. I can't stand it. I didn't name this form, so this is our test form. Have to name things. That's going to be on a quiz later. Have to name things. So our customer listing, we're going to add a button that is going to be called, it's an item button. It's going to happen once for every row in our listing, and it's going to be called get message. We'll see it on the screen, and the actions that it's going to do is it's going to run a workflow called execute demo. So this will comment here. The name that we're going to pass it is the name from the current row, which is available to us as a token. So we'll pass it was just name. Hopefully I got that right. And the result is going to be called, put it into a token called message. So now we can display toast message functionality just to put it up on the screen. So message up onto the screen. We'll let it stay for 10 seconds. We'll allow several of them to appear on the screen. It'll be right in the middle. And so at the end, now we have two actions, one that runs our workflow, one that gets puts the message up on the screen. So again, very easy work. We're just demonstrating functionality here today. So if I click on the one that says Dale Warner, and see it is the name variable. If I click on that one, we get a message, hi Dale Warner. If we click on Patrick, we get, hi Patrick, I see your name starts with a letter after. So that same work is able to be consumed from a form, from a listing. So let's talk about this this other special case, because we know we can consume them from a form, a listing, an API, automation. Those are easy. You just add an action. But a token is a special type, a special way to call a workflow. So let's take a look at that. If we go into tokens, I'm kind of an empty system here, so I'm going to create a new a new namespace for tokens called Café. You can name it anything you want, but I'm going to create a Café and add a new token, and we're going to call this the demo message, just to kind of differentiate it from anything else. So that's the within, we're not going to provide any kind of default value for that, but we could. But the definition of this is that it's going to run a workflow. So this is smart enough to be able to ask the questions that you need to ask. We'll pick the workflow that's going to get run, and we can get one output from this and return it as an output from the token. So we're going to pick out result, the field that was the only output field that we've defined. And we're going to skip any caching or options at this point and just keep it very simple. So if we save and test this, it shows us the syntax that we need. So it's the namespace Café, demo message is the name of the token. We send a name of whatever value we want, and it produces an output. So we've tested this, and if we say Amy here, we get Amy. Put Robert here, we get the expanded version. So this is the format of the token now. This token calls the workflow. Any work that was defined in it is going to get defined. We get back its outputs. Again, you don't necessarily have to have inputs. You don't have to have outputs. The actions in that might record something or take some other kind of action, but we're just doing a little bit of simple concatenation in that workflow. Anyway, this is our the format of what we need to do. So what we're going to do is add a column here and just display this automatically for every row. So this is a nice way to consume a token. So we go into our customer listing, and in our data, we're currently showing name and ID, but we'll add a computed field, and the value of our computed field is going to be this token. And instead of passing in Robert, we're going to pass in name. Now, actually these tokens are shown below, so I could have just clicked on that to get it to add it, but I typed it, and the case doesn't matter. So this is going to happen automatically every time that the row gets evaluated. And so now we have this column. I didn't give it a name, so it says field name. That's ugly, but it says Hi Dale, Warner, Patrick. So you can see it's running in every case, and it's doing our logic that we asked for it to do. So let's clean it up just a little bit. So this is the workflow column. Doesn't matter, but there it is. Okay, so that's the special case of creating a token that's consumable, and one way that you can consume it. But there's that tokens can be put virtually anywhere. So for example, you could put a token like this in an HTML block and pass in the username, and it would produce this message for you automatically as they load the page. They're just makes it very consumable wherever you need it to be. We're 10 minutes left to go, and I've got a couple more topics, but if you have questions, feel free to add to the questions or the chat, and we'll try and address them. Okay, so that was the special token type. So now a couple of known limitations. The Control-C, Control-V, a lot of you do copy and paste that way, doesn't work. It looks like it's going to work, but it doesn't work. So we don't advise you to use copy and paste to try and manipulate actions. If you go into workflows and you want to edit this thing and make a copy of it, we advise clicking on the item, clicking export. You'll get, you can copy that, and then you can import it back in. When you do that, it will reliably create a duplicate. it resets the description, but other than that, all your variables will be carried forward. So, for example, all the parameters will be carried forward, and so that's good. So we don't support Control-C, Control-V. Another one that's kind of annoying is that you should never use your inputs and outputs should be different names. So, for example, here I used name as an input, and our output is result. Is out result. If you use the same name, the way that our context builder works, this variable cannot be changed within the process. So if you were to input, if you were to use the same names, you're not the manipulations that you do in the middle aren't going to get reflected, and so you should avoid that. One way to do that is to name them with prefixes like in and out. If you're trying to, you might, if you had. I've done workflows in the past where you're trying to pass something in and it gets manipulated and maybe enhanced and then passed back out, and I named them the same thing. Doesn't work out. So definitely want to have different names. That's one thing. And then on conditionals, there's an unfortunate functionality. I'm going to get rid of this thing that we don't need, but if you make a change to a condition and whatever you type, and then just go right on into save, unfortunately, it doesn't save. You actually have to click out of a condition. A valid condition here, but if you click out of it and save, it will save. If you just go directly to the save button, it won't save, and so that might be a source of frustration to you. If you know about it in advance, you can deal with it. I talked about earlier, the conditionals might not move when you, these conditions might not move when you want them to. So for example, if we use the space tool and move things around, you might not like where it ends up putting this conditional, and so you might have to move it manually. So that's a known limitation. And I've already mentioned there's no else conditional. So all of your conditions have to, you have to provide a true path in your conditionals. Some way for the path to direct. So a couple of advanced topics. Scope. Any kind of token that you define or can use out of your configuration tokens are going to be available within your logic. So for example, if we were to say that we want to use a get something off the command line, and so we'll say we'll do a get the and get the variable iMessage, and we'll provide a default equals I. But this get is going to work for us, and so if we save and test this, we'll go back to our test here. If we say this, we get hi Dale. But if we add a iMessage here, so something off our command line, that variables are available. So tokens out of configuration / tokens are available to use within your scope. So you can get things like user ID and username and things off of the command line, things off of session. You can do some math. All those things are available. There was a question. Jim asked if you want to pass in a value in and out unchanged with the same name, guarantee that. Yes, currently it does, Jim. It would guarantee that. I think that we should. I think from a product standpoint, we should support having same names in and out. That you should be able to manipulate them in the middle. So I don't think I would rely on that as a. It's never going to change. I think that's a bug at this moment. Okay, so the point, I said what is available, the configurations / tokens are available. Context tokens are not. So for example, in this, if we had created a token, say in our, or even tried to pass a field name or something like that, the field names are not going to pass into your workflow unless you explicitly create an input and pass them in. So workflows are insulated from your normal context in that way. And then one of the cool ones, and we've demonstrated it elsewhere many times, is that entity inputs can be passed, and that the workflows read those properties for you. And I can demonstrate that here really quickly. If we add an input called C, that is a customer, we just go from our primitives, it's no longer a text, we go down to entities and say that we want to pass in a type of customer, and the default value, I'm going to provide the ID of a customer. ID number 1 is customer Dale Warner. So that'll be our default. But now in our processes, we have access to the C variable will contain all of the properties related to customer 1. So we can do that. And so now we can save and test locally, and it's going to say, hi, Joe, because of this default value. I see your name is Dale Warner because of the value we're passing here. So that's a cool feature that saves you from time. You don't have to read the customer when you say that you're passing in a customer and you pass it the ID of the customer when you're calling the workflow. You get all the properties of customer automatically, and you can use and consume them. And then last point, workflows can call workflows. So this is a nice building concept to say, you can define a workflow instead of getting larger and larger and larger and more complex, that you can define a workflow that does a discrete piece of work that's testable and very contained, and then call that from another workflow. So now you maybe have a master workflow that calls 1 or 2 or 5 subordinate ones to get different things to happen. By not enlarging not having one huge workflow that's hard to test all the different scenarios, you can break it down into smaller workflows that are testable and contained. And of course, workflows can call workflows that call workflows, however deep you need to go. So with that, that covered everything that I wanted to mention today. That should be a good overview into workflows, into what they are, all the different parts and pieces, and or some of the things that we know are known limitations, advanced topics, things. But be happy to take any questions for anybody who wants to stick around, but we've made it to our hour. We thank you for attending. Reminder, we'll do Campfire 2 days from now, the same hour. And so feel free to join and ask questions there as well. Thank you all, and we'll see you again next week.